All right, everybody. Hey, going to nerd out on some nutrition. Specifically, are there some people that maybe should increase gluten? Right now, before we dig into that, before you get all crazy on me, I'm not saying that everyone should increase gluten. Right? If you have an issue with gluten, then that's a different story. But if you're avoiding gluten just because that's the latest trend, I want to show you something that gluten can actually be useful for. Okay? So let's dig into it. The point of this is essentially is controlling blood sugar. Right? So if we have high glucose levels in the blood, that can be a problem. From an inflammation standpoint, from a cardiac risk standpoint, we want to control blood sugar. The body likes to be within a certain range with your blood sugar, right? With your numbers. And typically, what people will use to test that is their A1C numbers, right? There's also a measurement that you can use that's called glycomark that will actually measure spikes in blood sugar. And recent research is starting to lean towards, it's not necessarily the average that you would get with an A1C test that's most detrimental to your health. It's actually if you're controlling those spikes and those valleys with your blood sugar. So what goes into that? Well, ultimately what it comes down to is this first phase insulin response. And a lot of the research is showing that if this first phase insulin response is poor, meaning you don't control blood sugar well, after eating, that you're getting large spikes in your blood sugar, that you can't control those spikes, and that is doing more damage than having just an average high. So what controls this first phase insulin response? We eat food, we eat carbohydrates, the body signals us to produce insulin so that we can take blood sugar and remove it from the bloodstream, is the simple version. So what is a key player in that? GLP-1 and incretin in your gut is a hormone that is released when we consume foods, right? Think of it this way. This GLP-1 is like the signal caller, right? It calls in the plays ahead of time. So this GLP-1 is a hormone that kind of primes the body to say, hey, we just ate some stuff. We just ate a loaf of bread. We need to start to release some insulin, and we need to start to tell the peripheral tissues to increase their sensitivity to insulin, because in about a half an hour, we're going to have a bunch of these carbs in our system. So this GLP-1 is essentially priming the system, letting everybody know, hey, this is what's coming. All right, so this GLP-1 is a hormone. It will increase insulin secretion, preformed insulin, stuff that's already stored. It'll start to get that into the bloodstream. Like I said, it will increase peripheral tissues' sensitivity to insulin. Because it is a hormone, it will go systemic, it will go all over. And if we increase insulin and we increase our insulin sensitivity, then we're going to, in turn, increase our control of that blood sugar postprandial, post-consumption. All right? So we're good there. First phase insulin response, very important in looking at who is at risk for developing type 2 diabetes. It's one of the earlier signs of if you are at risk for developing type 2 diabetes is if this first phase insulin response is poor. GLP-1 is a key player in controlling this first phase insulin response. Okay, that's where we're at so far. DPP-4. Okay, DPP-4, what it will do, and there's medication for it too, that will increase or decrease DPP-4, but DPP-4 will essentially downregulate GLP-1. Okay, which if we're trying to control that first phase insulin response may not be a good thing for us, depending on the person. Again, please, there's context with all this. So if we're trying to control first phase insulin response, DPP-4, if it decreases GLP-1, it's going to decrease insulin, it's going to decrease insulin sensitivity, and it's not going to help our first phase insulin response. It's not going to help our control. All right, so if our goal is to control first phase insulin response, if we have issues with blood sugar, we don't want a whole lot of DPP-4. So what's something that would downregulate DPP-4? Well, there's medications, but they don't really prove to be very good. But one thing that will decrease DPP-4 is gluten. And if you look at the research, you'll see that a lot of studies that look at blood sugar and type 2 diabetes, there's a lot of positive results in the studies that are using wheat and whole grains. Why? Because one possible mechanism, not the only mechanism, one possible mechanism is that gluten is decreasing DPP-4, therefore allowing GLP-1 to do its job, to increase that first phase insulin response, to control blood sugar early, right after meals. All right, so there is a place for gluten, not to mention that it's usually in things that are delicious, right? So if you have a gluten intolerance, then you have a gluten intolerance. If you can't have it, then you can't have it. But if you're avoiding it just because, and you maybe have some insulin issues or some blood sugar issues, this might be something to look into further. All right, so again, just some nerding, geeking out, nutrition stuff, physiology, not for everybody, but hopefully that shows you a little bit that the story is not always so simple. I talked about it a while ago. Simple stories, we like simple stories. Rarely is it that simple. This is one of those cases. Gluten, the forbidden gluten actually could maybe help some people. All right, so that's it for Nerd Session on a Monday. Hope you enjoyed.